It was just another ordinary day, or so it seemed. The kind of day where you wake up, do your routine, and go about your business, not expecting anything unusual to happen. But for one woman, that ordinary day would turn into a courtroom battle that would leave everyone stunned. Imagine being in a room full of people who think they know exactly who you are, only to reveal a shocking truth that changes everything. This isn't your typical courtroom drama. This is a story of power, resilience, and unexpected twists that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. The tension in the air is thick. The crowd watches closely as a group of cops, confident in their position, stand in front of a judge, ready to sue a black woman they believe has wronged them. The charges are serious, and the stakes are high. They think they have her cornered, but what they don't know is that this woman is not who they think she is. She stands there, calm and collected, watching the officers with a knowing look in her eyes. The kind of look that tells you there's more beneath the surface. The officers, assuming they've won, don't expect the bombshell she's about to drop. With one simple statement, she flips the entire situation upside down. It's a revelation that shocks not just the cops, but everyone in the courtroom. The woman, once thought to be just another person in a sea of faces, reveals that she's not just anyone. She's the FBI chief. That's right. The very person these officers thought they could intimidate is someone they could never imagine having the power to turn the tables on them. As the room falls into stunned silence, the cops scramble to understand what just happened. But this is just the beginning. The true story is far from over, and the tension only grows from here. As the scene shifts, we meet another figure in the story, a teenager whose act of kindness will set off a chain of events that no one could predict. It starts on a crowded bus. A black teenager, just like any other, sees a pregnant white woman standing, struggling to find a seat. Without thinking twice, he stands up and offers her a seat. A simple act, right? But sometimes, the simplest gestures can have the most powerful impact. The woman, grateful for his kindness, leans in and whispers something in his ear. Her words are soft but filled with meaning. She hands him a note that will change his life forever. The teenager looks down at the piece of paper, his heart racing. He has no idea what's coming next, but he knows that this moment, this note, will be something he'll never forget. As the teenager unfolds the paper, we're left to wonder, what did the woman say to him? What could be so important that it's worth handing to a stranger? The tension builds, and the audience is left on the edge, yearning for answers. The stories of the woman in the courtroom and the teenager with a life-changing note are about to collide in a way no one could have predicted. What happens when ordinary people are thrust into extraordinary circumstances? How does one act of kindness lead to a future so different from what they could have ever imagined? And in the courtroom, what will happen when the truth is revealed? Will the cops be held accountable, or will they find a way to turn the tables once again? The answers are just around the corner, but one thing is certain, nothing is as it seems. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. What happens next will shock you. The courtroom was tense. The air felt thick with anticipation as the judge entered, his black robe sweeping the floor as he took his seat. The murmurs of the courtroom fell into a heavy silence, and all eyes were locked on the woman who stood calmly at the center of the room. To everyone else, she was just another black woman facing a group of officers who were ready to make their case. But in that moment, she wasn't just anyone. She wasn't someone they could easily intimidate or push around. No, she had a secret, a truth that she had kept hidden for far too long. And now, it was time to reveal it. The officers, visibly confident in their position, couldn't have known how much trouble they were in. They stood there, shoulders squared, believing that their uniforms and their status would be enough to silence anyone who dared challenge them. But there was a quiet strength about this woman, a calmness that spoke volumes. Her dark eyes were fixed on the judge, yet there was a weight in them, a weight that seemed to say she wasn't going down without a fight. Her fingers lightly tapped on the wooden table, as if measuring each moment, carefully thinking through what would happen next. The officers didn't understand the gravity of her silence. They didn't understand what was about to hit them. As the judge called the case to order, the officers began to present their side. They spoke about what they believed was a clear violation of their authority. They painted the woman as someone who had been uncooperative, someone who had made their lives more difficult. They described the incident, which had started as a routine stop and escalated quickly into something ugly, and they seemed sure that their version of events would be enough to sway the judge in their favor. The woman stood there, listening intently, not interrupting, not reacting. But in the back of her mind, she was preparing herself. She was ready. She knew exactly what she had to do. One of the officers, a tall man with a sharp jawline and cold eyes, looked smug as he finished his statement. He turned toward the judge and then glanced toward the woman as if daring her to speak. His gaze was full of arrogance, like he knew he had already won. But the woman didn't flinch. She simply cleared her throat, and in that moment, everything shifted. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. "I have something I need to share." The judge, who had been scribbling notes, paused and looked up. The officers froze. There was a noticeable shift in the room, a momentary flicker of doubt that passed through their minds. They had no idea what she was about to say. But whatever it was, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The woman took a step forward, her movements deliberate, her posture unwavering. "I'm not just any woman in this courtroom," she continued, her voice steady. "I'm the chief of the FBI." The words hung in the air, echoing through the room like a bombshell. There was a collective gasp. The officers' faces drained of color, their confident expressions now replaced with confusion and disbelief. The room went silent again, as if no one quite knew how to process what had just been revealed. The tall officer, who had been so sure of himself just moments before, now looked as though the floor had been pulled out from beneath him. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The other officers shifted uneasily in their seats, unable to comprehend what was happening. The judge, too, seemed taken aback, his pen now frozen in midair. It wasn't that he didn't believe her, it was just that no one had expected such a revelation. The woman's cool demeanor only added to the shock, her calmness in such an intense moment only serving to emphasize the gravity of her statement. For a moment, no one knew what to say. The judge was the first to recover, clearing his throat and motioning for the officers to sit down. He turned to the woman, his voice shaking just slightly. Is this true?" he asked, his tone uncertain. The woman nodded once, her gaze unwavering. "It's true. I am the chief of the FBI. I've been in this position for over 5 years. And I assure you, what's happening here is not what you think." The officers exchanged looks, their previous bravado now crumbling. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on them as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had they, a group of law enforcement officers, ended up in a courtroom facing the head of the FBI? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But the woman wasn't done. She had more to say, and this time, it wasn't just a matter of defending herself. She was going to take control of the situation. "I know you've been accustomed to using your badges to intimidate people," she continued, her voice still calm but laced with a quiet power. "But I'm not one of those people. I won't be silenced or bullied into submission. You wanted to make me the villain in the story, but now you'll see who you're really dealing with." The officers sat in stunned silence, their earlier confidence gone. They had underestimated her. And now they were about to find out just how much of a mistake that had been. As the tension in the courtroom simmered, another story was unfolding far from this scene. On the crowded bus, a teenage boy stood near the back, earbuds in, minding his own business. He had always been quiet, not one to draw attention to himself. But that day, something inside him shifted. He saw a pregnant woman struggle to find a seat, her hand resting on her stomach as she swayed with the motion of the bus. Without a second thought, he stood up and offered her a seat. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was an act of kindness, one that would come to mean more than he could ever have imagined. The woman smiled gratefully, her tired eyes meeting his for a moment. Then, as if she had been waiting for the right moment, she leaned in and whispered something in his ear. Her voice was soft, but the weight of her words was undeniable. "Take this," she said, pressing a small folded note into his hand. "It's for you. You'll need it." The teenager blinked, confused, but before he could ask any questions, she was already getting off the bus, her hands resting gently on her belly. He unfolded the note slowly, wondering what it could possibly say. As he read the words, his heart raced. The note wasn't just a message, it was a lifeline. A promise of something bigger than he could ever have imagined. But what did it mean? What did she want him to do with it? He looked around, hoping to see her again, but the woman was gone. The note, now pressed tightly in his hand, felt heavier than it had moments ago. It was more than just a scrap of paper. It was a key, and he had no idea what door it would open. The bus continued on its route, but for the teenager, nothing felt the same anymore. His life, in that instant, had changed in a way he couldn't understand, but he could feel it deep in his bones. Something was coming. Something that would soon collide with everything he thought he knew. The tension between the woman in the courtroom and the teenager on the bus was building, but the connections weren't clear yet. How were their stories intertwined? What would happen when their paths crossed? The answers were just beginning to unfold, but one thing was for certain. This wasn't just a random series of events. Something bigger was at play, and the pieces were slowly but surely falling into place. But the most important question remained. Would the officers pay for their mistakes, or would they find a way to turn the tables once again? And for the teenager, what was the note, and why had the woman given it to him? The answers were waiting, but the road ahead was far from clear. The courtroom was still vibrating with shock from the woman's revelation. The officers remained stiff, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. They had no idea how to proceed. The woman they had presumed to be just another person, someone they could push around and manipulate, had just dismantled their carefully constructed narrative with a single statement. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of her words. The judge, who had been flustered at first, cleared his throat again and motioned for the officers to sit down. They did so reluctantly, their faces tight with frustration and embarrassment. They hadn't come here to lose. They hadn't expected to face an FBI chief in a courtroom. This was supposed to be a straightforward case, a case where they could use their authority to overpower anyone who dared challenge them. But the tables had turned in the blink of an eye. As the room continued to hum with an uncomfortable energy, the woman stood tall, her gaze unwavering. She was fully aware of the chaos she had just caused. She knew that revealing her identity wasn't just about putting the officers in their place. It was about setting a precedent. There was something deeper at play here, something far more personal than just a courtroom battle. Her thoughts flickered back to the day this all started. The officers had stopped her for a minor traffic violation, one that would have been dismissed under normal circumstances. But things had escalated quickly. They had accused her of being uncooperative, of resisting their authority. And that's when things got out of hand. As the woman relived the moments in her mind, she felt a sense of resolve. She had known she couldn't back down. Not when the system had been so thoroughly stacked against people like her. Not when she knew how easily people of color could be mistreated, silenced, or dismissed. They had underestimated her, and now she would make sure they never did again. But this case wasn't just about her. It was about the countless people who had been crushed under the weight of systemic abuse and corruption. It was about making a stand for something greater than herself. She wasn't just an FBI chief. She was a symbol of resistance, of strength, of standing up when no one else would. And now, she had a platform, an audience that would be forced to listen. The officers exchanged glances. Their silence was not due to shock anymore, but to a deep sense of discomfort. They weren't just dealing with a woman who had been wronged. They were dealing with someone who could potentially bring their entire careers crashing down. They had no idea how deep the woman's connections ran, and they had no idea how much influence she had in the shadows. Their cockiness from moments ago had vanished, replaced with a palpable fear. They had walked into a courtroom thinking they had the upper hand, and now they were second-guessing every move. The tall officer who had spoken earlier, the one who had been the most arrogant, was the first to speak up, his voice shaky. We need to reconsider the charges, he said, his words barely above a whisper. The others nodded slowly, their faces still pale, unsure of what to do next. But it was too late for that. The woman didn't need to say anything more. Her presence alone was enough to send a message. She was untouchable. The case had shifted, and now it was their turn to answer to her. The officers had no idea how much trouble they were really in, but they were about to find out. While this drama unfolded in the courtroom, the teenager on the bus was still holding the note in his hand, his mind racing. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman's words. "You'll need it," she had said. But what did that mean? Why had she handed him the note? What was it that she wanted him to do? And why him? The note felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to open it again. The weight of it was too much. Something about the entire situation felt strange, like he had just stumbled into something much bigger than himself. His life had been relatively quiet up until that point. No real drama, no extraordinary events. But now, everything had changed. He had always been the quiet kid, the one who kept his head down and did his homework. But this note, this mysterious woman, they were pulling him into something he didn't fully understand. His thoughts kept spiraling, but he had to make a choice. Should he throw the note away and forget everything? Maybe it wasn't meant for him at all. Maybe it was just some kind of random gesture. But the feeling in his gut told him it was more than that. He couldn't ignore it. The bus jolted to a stop, and he snapped back to reality. A small group of passengers got off, and the teenager found himself standing up. His destination was still a few stops away, but he needed some air. He needed to clear his head. As he walked off the bus, the world outside seemed to have changed somehow, the colors of the street more vivid, the sounds more intense. His heart pounded in his chest, the note still clenched tightly in his hand. As he walked down the sidewalk, his mind raced with possibilities. Was it a warning? A chance to do something bigger than he ever dreamed? Or was it just a fluke? The woman had looked so serious, so sure of herself, when she handed it to him. He could still see the way her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that left him feeling both honored and terrified. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of sirens in the distance. It was strange how they seemed to be growing louder, echoing off the buildings. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something that would change everything. Back in the courtroom, the tension was still thick. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is highly irregular," he said, his voice strained. "We can't proceed like this. We need to." But the woman interrupted him, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You can't ignore what's been revealed here. This isn't just about a traffic stop gone wrong. This is about accountability. About making sure those who wear the badge understand that they can't act with impunity. And I'm here to make sure that justice is served." Her words hung in the air, and the officers shifted uncomfortably. They knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Outside, the teenager felt the sirens drawing closer, and in that moment, everything seemed to be converging. He had no idea how his story was connected to hers, but he knew it had to be. It was like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. The note, the woman, the tension in the courtroom, and now the sound of sirens, it was all leading somewhere. But where? And what did it mean for him? As the day unfolded, the questions only deepened, and the answers seemed just out of reach. The tension in the courtroom, the mystery of the note, and the events that were still to come were all part of a larger story. A story that was far from over, and one that no one, least of all the officers, could have predicted. The tension in the courtroom reached a boiling point. The woman, still standing with an air of quiet confidence, could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her. The officers, now thoroughly rattled, exchanged frantic glances. They were still processing her words, trying to understand how they had ended up in this situation. But there was no turning back now. She wasn't just defending herself. She was rewriting the rules. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to bring some semblance of order back to the chaos. But it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. The balance of power had shifted, and no one knew where it would land. The woman's calm demeanor only seemed to make her presence more formidable. She stood like a rock in the storm, unshaken by the drama unfolding around her. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I didn't come here to cause a scene. I came here to ensure that justice is served. I came here to make sure that people who have been given authority over others are held accountable when they abuse that power. The officers shifted uneasily. The tall one, the one who had been so sure of himself earlier, looked like he might be sick. His hands, which had once been clasped confidently in front of him, were now trembling. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The woman didn't need him to speak. She already knew that the system, as it was, would not let her win easily. But she was prepared for that. She had dealt with systems of power before. She had fought the corruption that festered in the corners of institutions, and she had won. But this time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or silenced. The sound of sirens grew louder outside, and the woman's sharp ears picked up the increasing noise. Something was coming. The officers didn't know it yet, but their day of reckoning was close at hand. The room felt like it was about to explode. As the woman stood there, the realization of what was at stake settled in. She wasn't just dealing with a case of police misconduct. She was challenging a system that had been built on layers of secrecy, control, and power. And now that system was starting to crack. Meanwhile, far outside the courtroom, the teenager was still processing the note he had been given. He had walked for what felt like hours, his mind spinning with thoughts, doubts, and questions. The sirens he had heard earlier were still echoing in his ears, and it felt as though the city itself was holding its breath. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something big. He didn't know exactly what role he played in all of this, but he knew it was significant. The note, the mysterious words of the woman on the bus, felt like a seed planted in his life, one that was about to grow in ways he couldn't yet understand. He stopped in front of a small coffee shop, the bright lights inside casting a warm glow against the dark night. His fingers brushed the edge of the note in his pocket. He had unfolded it again in the privacy of his thoughts, but the words still didn't make sense. It had been a warning, he thought. A message meant for someone who could do something, but not him, someone who wasn't just a regular kid on the street. And yet, somehow, everything was drawing him closer to something he couldn't escape. His heart was racing. He looked around nervously. No one else seemed to notice the urgency building inside him. But he could feel it. The tension, the danger, the rising uncertainty. The bus ride, the woman, the note. They were all linked together, forming a web he couldn't untangle. Back in the courtroom, the woman was facing the judge again, her gaze intense. She wasn't afraid of the threats that the officers might try to throw at her. She knew exactly how they would try to twist the narrative, how they would attempt to manipulate the system. She had seen it all before. But this time, she was in control. She was the one holding the cards. "I'm not here to argue with you," she said coolly, her voice unwavering. "I'm here to demand accountability. If you think this ends here, you're mistaken. You'll hear from me again, and the truth will come to light." There was no mistaking the finality in her tone. She wasn't giving them an option to walk away. One of the officers, a younger man who had been quiet up until now, raised his hand nervously. His voice wavered when he spoke. "What do you want us to do?" he asked, genuinely unsure of where to turn. "What is it you want from us?" The woman fixed her eyes on him, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in her gaze, something that resembled both pity and understanding. She knew this officer wasn't the one with the power. He was just a cog in the machine, following orders, trying to do his job. But he wasn't the one who would decide the outcome of this case. He wasn't the one who had the control. "You'll learn," she said softly, "that there are some things you can't run from. And you'll learn that when the truth comes for you, there's no hiding." Her words hit the officers hard. They had been so sure of their positions, so certain of their power. But now, the scales were tipping. Outside, the sirens had grown deafening. The teenager, now standing at the edge of a busy street, saw a car speeding toward him. His heart jumped into his throat. Something about it didn't feel right. Too fast, too reckless. He looked down at the note in his hand again. What was it trying to tell him? Was it a warning? Or was it a sign that he needed to act? He had no way of knowing. The car swerved past him in a blur, its screeching tires tearing through the air like an alarm bell. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over his feet, his pulse hammering in his ears. He had no idea who was in the car or why it had been going so fast. But in that instant, everything seemed to collide. The sirens, the note, the woman on the bus, the officers in the courtroom. Everything was coming to a head. The moment of truth was nearly upon them all. The final pieces were falling into place, but no one could see the full picture yet. The courtroom, the streets, the lives of everyone involved, they were all about to be drawn into the same storm. The woman, the teenager, the officers, all of them had been swept into a tide of fate that would carry them toward an unforgettable climax. And when it came, nothing would ever be the same. The teenager, still rattled by the near miss with the speeding car, stood frozen in place. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything that was happening around him. The sirens had finally stopped, but their wails still echoed in his ears. There was a strange pull in his chest, a nagging feeling that something far bigger than him was unfolding, something that could shatter everything he thought he knew about the world. Just as he started to regain his composure, a figure emerged from the shadows. The woman from the bus. Her silhouette stood stark against the bright streetlights, her posture resolute, her face unreadable. The teenager's heart skipped a beat. Why was she here, of all places, and why did it feel like she had been waiting for him? "You're not safe here," she said, her voice calm but urgent. Her eyes scanned the street quickly, as if expecting something or someone to appear. The teenager's mind was whirling. "What do you mean? What's happening? Who are you?" The woman glanced around again, her body tensing. "I don't have much time. The people you think you can trust, those officers in that courtroom, they're not who you think they are. There's a much larger game being played here." Her words were like a punch to his gut. His head spun, and his confusion grew deeper. He had no idea what she was talking about. Everything had already seemed so twisted, so out of control. The officers, the courtroom, the note, none of it made sense anymore. "You're involved in something far bigger than a traffic stop," the woman continued. "You were chosen. And now, they'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't get in their way." Before he could respond, the sound of an engine revving in the distance cut through the air. The woman's eyes widened, and she grabbed the teenager's wrist. "Run. Now." He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Fear surged through his veins, and instinct took over. He sprinted down the street, the woman at his side, weaving through pedestrians and parked cars. The sound of the engine grew louder, closer, like a predator closing in on its prey. They turned down an alley, ducking into the narrow passageway between two buildings, but the pursuit didn't let up. The teenager's heart pounded in his chest as he heard tires screeching, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle turning sharply. He dared a glance over his shoulder and saw a black SUV barreling down the street after them. The woman was ahead of him now, moving with a speed that seemed unnatural. It was as if she knew exactly where to go, as if she'd done this 100 times before. And maybe she had. The teenager's mind raced with 1,000 questions, but the only thing that mattered now was keeping up. They rounded another corner, and the woman shoved open a rusty door that led into an abandoned building. The teenager hesitated for only a second, then followed her inside. The door slammed shut behind them with a heavy thud, cutting off the noise of the outside world. The dim light from a broken window illuminated dust particles in the air, but there was no time to look around. The woman grabbed his arm again, pulling him deeper into the building. They didn't stop running until they reached the back of the building, where a set of metal stairs led to the rooftop. The woman moved quickly, taking the steps two at a time, and the teenager followed suit, his legs burning with exertion. The roof was flat, but it was deserted. No one there to chase them. For a moment, they both paused, catching their breath. The woman's gaze was fixed on the skyline, her eyes sharp, scanning for any sign of movement. Her face was a mask of determination, but there was something else there, something darker. "You're in more danger than you realize," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a rare vulnerability. "This isn't just about you. It's about everything. They're using you as a pawn in a game you can't even begin to understand." The teenager stared at her, confusion still clouding his mind. "Who? What game? Who's after me?" The woman exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping ever so slightly. I was hoping you wouldn't ask. But it's time you knew. The officers you saw in the courtroom, they're just a small part of a much larger operation. They're working for someone powerful. Someone who controls the narrative, who controls the very system you thought you understood. And you're the key. The words hit him like a ton of bricks. His chest tightened and his head spun even more. What do you mean, I'm the key? The woman turned to face him fully, her expression intense. You have something they want. You don't know it yet, but the moment you opened that note, your life changed. The note wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation. And now, they'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't unlock whatever it is they're after. The teenager shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. But why me? I'm just a kid. I don't even know what's going on. She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him feel like she could see right through him. That's the thing, kid. You've always been just a kid, but not anymore. You've been marked. They're watching you right now, probably closer than you realize. And the only way to protect yourself is to stay ahead of them. Her words felt like a cold slap to the face. The danger wasn't just a looming threat anymore. It was real. Someone was after him. Someone powerful. Someone dangerous. And all he had was a note, a mysterious woman, and no idea what to do next. But as the sound of footsteps echoed up the stairwell behind them, the woman's face hardened. They found us. You need to make a choice now. Are you ready to fight back? The teenager's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. Everything was spiraling toward an unknown end, and the only thing he knew for sure was that he couldn't run from it anymore. The chase was on. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and the teenager's heart pounded in his chest. The woman stood motionless for a moment, her eyes scanning the rooftop as if calculating their next move. Without a word, she motioned for him to follow her. She moved toward the edge of the building, her body tense, poised for action. Don't make a sound, she whispered. The teenager nodded, though his mind was a whirlwind. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, but the woman's confidence made him stay. She wasn't scared. She wasn't about to back down. So, neither could he. As they approached the edge of the building, the sound of the footsteps halted, but the pressure in the air didn't let up. They could hear voices, muffled but unmistakable. The officers. And they weren't alone. The teenager could hear a low murmur of conversation, too quiet to make out, but enough to tell him that something bigger was happening, something even more sinister than he had imagined. The woman held up her hand, signaling him to stay silent. She peered over the rooftop's edge, her expression unreadable. Then, with a quick glance, she turned back to him. This is it, she said, her voice calm but fierce. We fight now, or we don't fight at all. The teenager's mind was spinning. He wasn't sure what fighting meant in this context. He had no weapons, no experience in any kind of confrontation. He was just a teenager, a regular kid, who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But standing there, next to the woman, he realized something. He didn't have a choice anymore. If he didn't act, if he didn't do something, he might not survive the night. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. Without a word, he stepped forward, following her lead. They crouched low, moving quickly but quietly across the rooftop toward a narrow fire escape on the other side. But as they reached the edge, the woman stopped abruptly. Her face had gone pale. They're here, she muttered under her breath. It's too late. Before the teenager could ask what she meant, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. He spun around, heart racing, to find one of the officers standing behind him, his face twisted in a smug grin. The officer's grip tightened, and the teenager's stomach dropped. You really thought you could get away? The officer sneered. You're in way over your head, kid. The woman's expression hardened. In one swift motion, she pulled something from her coat, a small device, a sleek, metallic piece of technology that the teenager couldn't identify. The officer's grin faltered, confusion flickering across his face. What the hell is that? He demanded. The woman didn't answer. She pushed a button, and instantly, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. The officer's eyes widened as he stumbled backward, a look of sheer disbelief on his face. In the blink of an eye, he was thrown several feet away, as if an invisible force had blasted him. The teenager gasped, taking a step back. What did you? The woman's gaze never left the officer, who was now struggling to regain his footing. I told you, she said, her voice colder than ever. I don't play by the rules. The officer, now clearly shaken, pulled out his radio, shouting something into the device. But before he could call for backup, the woman had already moved. With a fluid motion, she disarmed him, taking the radio and slamming it to the ground. It shattered with a sharp crack. Enough, she said, her voice barely audible now. But just as the tension reached its peak, the unexpected happened. Another figure emerged from the shadows, a man, dressed in a suit, his face calm and collected. He stepped onto the rooftop with a kind of authority that made the woman freeze. The officer, still trying to collect himself, fell silent. The newcomer's presence seemed to demand it. The teenager could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This man wasn't like the officers. There was something different about him, something dangerous. The woman stiffened. You, she said, her voice low. I should have known it was you. The man's lips curled into a cold smile. Did you really think I wouldn't be keeping an eye on you, Maria? He said, using the woman's name. You've been a thorn in my side for far too long. Maria? The woman had a name and, apparently, a past. But the teenager didn't have time to process this new information. Everything he thought he knew was being turned upside down. What do you want? Maria demanded, her hand still gripping the device. The man's smile widened, and he took a step closer. It's over. All of it. You've been chasing shadows for too long. The game's already been won. The teenager felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. This was about something much bigger. Something that involved powerful people with vast resources, and they weren't about to let Maria or anyone else stand in their way. But before anyone could react, there was a sudden, deafening roar. A helicopter appeared overhead, its blades slicing through the air. The man's face faltered for a split second. He hadn't expected that. Get down, Maria shouted to the teenager, pushing him to the ground. The helicopter's spotlight flickered on, blinding them both for a moment. It wasn't just any helicopter, it was military grade. The kind of thing you'd expect to see in covert operations, not in a city street. The man cursed under his breath and reached for his earpiece. They're here earlier than expected, he muttered. Maria's eyes darted back and forth, calculating, thinking. Then, in a flash, she grabbed the teenager's arm and hauled him toward the edge of the rooftop. We're getting out of here, she said, her tone fierce. Now. With no time to lose, they sprinted toward the far side of the building, the helicopter circling above them. But just as they reached the fire escape, the man's voice called out behind them, chillingly calm. You think you can outrun this? You're only delaying the inevitable. Maria didn't turn around. Maybe, she said, her voice steady, but I'm not done fighting yet. As they descended the fire escape, the teenager's mind was in chaos. They were being hunted, pulled deeper into a web of danger he still didn't understand. But one thing was clear. Nothing about this situation was what it seemed. And even though the odds were stacked against them, he couldn't help but feel that, for the first time, he had some kind of power. The note, the woman, the fight, it was all connected. And now it was up to him to figure out how to win. But as they disappeared into the shadows below, one final twist echoed through the night. The teenager looked down at his hand, where the note had been tucked away, and noticed something new. Something written on the back in tiny, almost invisible letters. It wasn't just a warning. It was an instruction. And it held the key to everything. But to understand it, he would have to face the truth, the kind of truth that could shatter everything he knew. The teenager stood still, the mysterious note clutched in his hand as Maria pulled him through the streets. His heart was still racing from the chaos of moments before, the helicopter above, the tense confrontation on the rooftop. But now, as they found shelter in a dimly lit alley, a sense of urgency settled over him. The words on the back of the note had been simple, but cryptic. Trust no one but yourself. The time is now. He stared at the note for a moment longer before Maria spoke again, her voice softer than before, but still sharp with resolve. Do you know what this means? she asked, her eyes searching his face as if she could read every flicker of emotion passing through him. The teenager nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He didn't fully understand the gravity of what had just happened, but something inside him had clicked. He was a part of something far larger than he ever imagined, a dangerous game that had already cost lives, and one that was far from over. "I think I do," he said, his voice steady but unsure. Maria took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the dark alley as she checked for any signs of pursuit. That note wasn't just a message. It's a warning. Whoever's behind this, they're not just after you. They've been playing this game for years, maybe decades. But this is bigger than just one person. It's a power struggle that could shake the world as we know it. The teenager felt the weight of her words. His whole life, he had been going about his days like most people, focused on school, on small daily problems, unaware of the larger forces at play. Now, everything was different. He wasn't just another kid anymore. He was part of a much larger puzzle, and the pieces were still falling into place. Maria exhaled, her gaze intense. They've been trying to control everything, the police, the media, the system, and you've become their pawn. But I won't let them win. We'll expose them. He looked up at her, his mind spinning.
How?
What do we do now? Maria paused for a moment, clearly thinking through her next move. We need to get to the people who can help. The ones who have been working in the shadows. People who know the truth but have been silenced for far too long. They have the resources, the power to take down the people who've been pulling the strings. The teenager nodded, though his mind was still reeling. This wasn't what he had expected when he first stepped onto that bus. He had no idea that a simple act of kindness, giving up his seat for a pregnant woman, would spiral into a life-altering chain of events. We'll have to be careful, Maria warned. They'll be watching. They already know what you're capable of now. They're not going to let you slip through their fingers. His thoughts turned to the officers from the courtroom, to the man who had confronted them on the rooftop. All of them were part of the same machine, corrupt, dangerous, and powerful. He had barely begun to understand how deep the corruption ran, and it frightened him. But he also felt something else, a rising sense of determination. He had a part to play in all this, and if that meant fighting back, then so be it. Over the next few days, Maria led him through the labyrinth of underground meetings and covert exchanges. They met with people who had been on the fringes of the system, whistleblowers, ex-government agents, tech experts, and journalists, all united by a common cause, to expose the truth and bring down the people in power who had been manipulating the system for their own gain. They were a small, tightly knit group, but they were relentless. As the teenager got deeper into the world Maria had introduced him to, he began to understand the scale of the conspiracy they were fighting against. It wasn't just about one corrupt police officer or one shady government official. It was about an entire network of powerful individuals who had used their influence to control the narrative, to shape the world in their favor. And it was up to them to dismantle it piece by piece. But the stakes were high. Each step they took brought them closer to danger, and the closer they got to uncovering the truth, the more they attracted the attention of those in power. There were close calls, moments when it seemed like the walls were closing in on them. But Maria never faltered, and her determination fueled his own. It was during one of these tense moments, as they prepared to leak a series of documents to the press, that the teenager finally understood what Maria had meant when she said he was the key. The documents they were about to release contained crucial evidence, proof of the widespread corruption that had plagued the system for years. But there was something else hidden in the files, something that would change everything. The teenager's hands shook as he sifted through the pages, the weight of the decision pressing on him. He had no idea how far-reaching this would be, but he knew one thing for sure. Once the truth came out, there would be no going back. The world would never be the same. Maria stood beside him, watching him carefully. "You've come a long way," she said quietly. "But now, it's time to take the final step." The teenager took a deep breath and hit the button to send the files to the press. As soon as he did, his phone buzzed with a series of notifications. The news was spreading like wildfire. The documents were everywhere, on social media, on news outlets, in the hands of journalists who had been waiting for this moment. But just as they were about to leave, a new message appeared on his screen. It was from the same unknown number that had sent him the original note. He opened it, his heart racing. "You're not done yet. They'll come for you. Keep moving. Keep fighting. You've only just begun." A chill ran down his spine. They weren't finished. The battle was far from over. As Maria grabbed his arm and they hurried down the hallway to their next safe house, the teenager realized something. The fight for truth wasn't just about exposing a system of corruption. It was about standing up to the forces that tried to silence them, to keep them in the shadows. And for the first time since all of this had started, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just running anymore. He was moving forward. With Maria by his side and a world of truth ahead of them, the teenager understood that his life had changed forever. The road ahead was uncertain. The danger was far from over. But he was no longer the naive teenager who had given up his seat on the bus. He had become a symbol of resistance, a small but powerful part of a much larger movement. And in the end, that made all the